Okay, we're going to be shooting into a new series all about developing a greater sense of self-intimacy. I've been reading the book Intimacy, Trusting the Self and the Other by Osho. Phenomenal book. I mean, I think pretty much the same as everything else that Osho has ever said. It's not the kind of information that you just take in like a nice clean slice and you're just like, okay, that makes sense, I can now apply it. It's more that kind of teaching that permeates your being and that you have to sit with and you kind of have to breathe into it, so to speak, and you live that and you notice where it really hits you around the heart, in the deeper recesses of your mind. And it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful book to read. The parts that I've read so far in the book, Osho has just spoken about sort of like 3 major aspects to having self-intimacy. He's also talked about how developing intimacy in yourself, with yourself, is something that's very crucial regarding developing closeness and authenticity with other people. If we can't have a sense of being intimately connected with ourselves, it is all but impossible to have it with another person. And we need to have that closeness inside of us, and then we bring those flames together. Osho gives the analogy of bringing 2 candle flames together so that they become so close that they begin to combine into one radiant sort of light. I think that's a really beautiful way of thinking about intimacy with another. So we will cover those other 2 pillars of self-intimacy in the next videos. I'll make them next, but let's talk today about the first one, which is listening to your own inner voice. So being able to trust the voice inside of oneself, despite and often in spite of all the noise and the sort of commotion and the BS that surrounds us a lot of the time. The way that I want you to think about this is, imagine you're deciding what it is that you want to do with your life. Let's just use this as an analogy, as an example. Maybe you're actually in this position. Maybe you're sort of thinking about where you want to be going next. But imagine you're thinking about what it is that you really want to do with your life. Like what you're going to be doing for the next 10 or 20 years, like the direction that you're going to head in, the kind of person that you're going to become. And let's say your father wants you to be an engineer, because being an engineer is a stable job. There's always engineering opportunities. It's something that has a high rate of return. Like if you go do an engineering degree, it's pretty likely you're going to get hired into a firm if you can complete it. It's pretty likely you're always going to have some degree of work. The work is typically quite high paid. And then on top of that, it tends to put you in a higher status bracket in society and culture. And there's other motives that your father, in this example, may have. Like, for example, in his social circle, he's able to, when someone asks him about his son, he's not just saying, oh, my son's just like some guy. He's like saying, my son's an engineer. Yeah, my son's like an engineer. He's a civil engineer. Yeah, my son's like maybe like a aerospace engineer. Like, you know, there's something prestigious about it. And that's what we tend to do a lot of the time, is we live through the people around us. It's kind of like this idea of name dropping. But in that case, it allows the father to have a sense of like, I have a son who's prestigious in this way. It's a reflection of me, and he's a reflection of me, and I'm a reflection of him in that sense. And there's many, many more examples why your father just may think that, right? It's just in his paradigm, being an engineer is actually something that pays off and it's worth investing in. And let's say, on the other hand, your mom wants you to be a doctor. For similar reasons, you might have slightly different reasonings behind it. Maybe she's a bit more gentle and a bit more nurturing, perhaps. And there's a sense that it's being a good person. There's kind of a more moral component added to the job security and added to the prestige, whatever else. But the idea is that both of these options, they're preferences that your parents tend to have. And some parents will have preferences, but they have that intimacy within themselves and they've developed to a level where they won't impose those preferences on their children. But some parents are just blatantly unable to do this. Like, the preferences and the worldviews that they have, for example, are quite intensely imposed upon their children. And they're often like not aware at all about how that's affecting them, or how that might actually lead to a disaster later on, because what it is that you're pressuring them into is not necessarily in alignment with them. And it's quite startling because you can realize in that case, maybe a lot of people's parents don't actually really know who they are and don't really have much of an interest in understanding them. It's actually very sad. So there's an example with the parents. But let's say you want to be a poet. Let's say for you, you just love reading poetry books. It's just something that you picked up at some point and you've kind of learned how to write poetry. Maybe you've always done it a little bit. If you have a bit of spare time, you're just going to write a poem down. And there's this kind of rhythm. It's almost like there's this timelessness that you tap into where it's challenging, but there's also that kind of ease that comes with it. There's that balance of flow. And you're just writing poetry and you're just really into it. It just works for you. You just like it. And naturally, because we have a sense of wanting to identify with our preferences at some level, you want to like be a poet. That's really what you want to do. It's like if you're asking yourself most honestly, what is it that I really want to do? If you think about the things that spark joy in you, reminds me of that book, Spark Joy. If you think about the things that provide you with that sense of bliss of Joseph Campbell, as Joseph Campbell would say, right? You follow your bliss. It's that thing that just like ignites that fire in your heart and illuminates and irradiates your presence. It's that writing poetry. Naturally, if you listen to that, it's like that's what you want to follow. But we just gave examples with parents, but then you've also got to consider friends and peer groups, authority figures, the media, the influence that the media has, the kind of television and music that we listen to. And then on top of that, just frankly, like the general fabric and the context of the society and the culture that we live in, the religious background that we have, or maybe the secular background that we have, it has a certain kind of system and it pushes that system, it pushes that program in to the point where oftentimes that inner voice in us gets so drowned out by all this noise and commotion and BS that's being sort of pushed on us from the outside that we completely lose the ability to hear it. And the point behind this video, the point behind this message is learning to actually get in touch with your own inner voice again. When we say inner voice, I'm not necessarily referring to like a monologue. It's not necessarily like a sense of here's some words that are just saying a certain thing in your mind, like that kind of idea of like, I want to be a poet. The inner voice tends to speak in a lot of different ways. Sometimes if you're quite connected to it, it can be conscious. And when you start to identify with it, it can have more of a monologue, or maybe it can appear in the form of a dialogue in your mind. But oftentimes the inner voice speaks more in the language of, it's kind of like these subtler feelings, these subtle underlying electrical currents. Like we said before, when you write poetry, I said about there being a sense of timelessness and a sense of just like really knowing what you're doing and really knowing who you are. And I'm kind of feeling that in myself right now, just because I really know at least a couple of those things for me. And there's this sense of just like when you go to that place within yourself, you're like lit up. You're like radiant somehow. And it's the opposite of depression. I want to also mention that really clearly. When you are in a state of depression, you're like at an apathy level and you're at a state where you don't want anything. Depression, like at a deep level, is a sense of not being able to connect with anything. You can barely connect with the notion of moving. At the deepest, like lowest level, it's a sense of a complete loss of life. Notice how when you listen to the inner voice and there's that radiance in us, this is the complete opposite of that. There's an absolute affinity, an absolute connection with what it is that you love to do, and it moves you. And what I want you to just consider as a notion here, just in the space of this video, is what would it be like if you woke up in the morning and you had such a strong connection with that inner voice and that inner radiance that you just knew today that's what you were going to do, that you were going to write your poetry? Or it could be whatever it is for you. Maybe it's that you love mathematics. I've got a friend who really actually loves mathematics. He's doing his PhD in mathematics. And I can tell when he talks about mathematics, his mind is just well suited for that domain. Or like maybe it's that you love communication with people. It's like your art form is through communication. I'm making a series on the book, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin right now. that I'll be posting on my Patreon. That was supposed to be a surprise, but I'll be starting a Patreon soon. And there's a part in that book where he talks about anything can be your art form. Anything, it could be communication. It could be something more traditional like music or painting, making music again. Could be music twice, or painting. Could be a sport. Could be jiu-jitsu. But it's that thing that just radiates you from the inside. Imagine having such a deep connection with what that thing is, that's what your day's centered around. And it's like your core sense of identity is reassumed. Your sovereignty is like reassumed back to your core. So all those times that you feel lost, or that you feel like something challenges you, or you feel like something confronts you, it's like you can reassume your identity, and it's not based on who people said you were or who people said that you should be. Because let's be honest, no one really knows who you are. Like half the time we don't know who we are because of all this noise, because of all this influence. But imagine if you were just deeply and richly in touch with that thing that you loved above all else. And it's like, what I want you to just in the space of this video is just imagine what it would be like if you had like this very deep sense of conviction that by attuning to this, like Joseph Campbell says, following your bliss, that the universe would support you. And that your core sense of identity was based around listening to that inner voice. And again, it doesn't have to just be a monologue. It doesn't have to come in the form of words, but it comes in the form of that radiance and that inner luminescence of connecting to what it is that you love. And when you have a richer and more potent sense of what it is that you love and why you're getting up in the morning, why you're starting your day, what your vision is in life, that sense of love for that thing radiates out, and the cup overfloweth, as they say in the Bible. The cup overfloweth, and it pours out into all the other endeavors in your life. It's like, think about it like this. When you're imagine you're having an interaction with someone that's kind of challenging or kind of difficult, and it's just sort of confronting, and you know one of those interactions where you're just not getting anywhere with someone, and you can tell that it's just a complete limitation, maybe in like worldview, and it's just not going to go anywhere. But usually when we tend to get really pissed off or we get really frustrated with this, I think it often comes from a sense of too much of our sense of self and our sense of identity getting enwrapped within this thing and getting tied up within this thing. But imagine if you had a core sense of identity, like this really strong, flexible sense of identity, like bamboo or like a powerful pillar that was in place, that was so sovereign. And again, it's your inner voice. It's so sovereign that when you have a bad interaction with someone, like we just said, or maybe you have like a rejection or something, or maybe like you just have something going with your health or family thing, it's like, even though that thing would bother you, because you have this strong, flexible sense of self-identity, it's ultimately able to hold you through all of those difficult times. And that's really what comes with a long time of focusing on and trusting what it is that you really love, even though there are voices and things outside. Like, and when you are building this connection to your inner voice and to your passion and your purpose, it's really worth mentioning that it is going to be tested constantly. That's how you know it's strong. Like, you're going to have people on the outside tell you that you're crazy for wanting to travel or do this thing, or maybe, like, again, have an art form in poetry. You're going to have people who are crazy for telling you that they're going to tell you that following your bliss is like a pipe dream, and that it's a waste of time, that it's not practical. They'll say everything in the book. Different people will say it in different ways. The people who are really like subsumed and like just plugged into kind of like that dark, sort of buried vibration. Like, these are the people who are usually going to be using drugs and alcohol, and they're kind of, they're like energetically gaunt is a way that I often describe it. It's like they don't necessarily have to be physically gaunt, often they are too, but they're going to be like energetically gaunt. It's like they're sucked in because life has sucked everything out of them, and they can't even hear their inner voice. They're not even like original in any way. They're just a product of what's around them. These are the people who, because we only really say what it is that we are, we only communicate what it is that we are, these are the people who are going to tell you that you shouldn't be following your inner voice. So I really want you to look out for that. People who say things like, you should, you should do this. This is a safer. This is the best. I'm doing the right thing. Like this sense of like pride that comes with it, and this sense of trying to covet the sense of right constantly, and always fighting, always needing to instantiate, always using force, never using power, always using fear, never using love. Watch out for that. That's the shit that's really going to test that capacity. And what we said there about we only really give out what we give, that's really where this becomes a massive part of self-intimacy. When you have that deep connection to your own inner voice and you can slow down and listen to yourself more, in whatever form that voice is communicating with you, the way that you communicate with other people is vivified. It's potent. It has an aliveness. You can feel the presence of someone who loves what they're doing and who is alive. You know what I mean? I feel like everyone really knows this at a deep level, at a core level. There's a sense of just that potent, rich presence and aliveness. That ability to concentrate and be present and be here, because that person is vivified by life. It's like they're drinking from the waters of life, and they're not drinking from like the bloody river Styx, like that energetically gaunt vampire we're talking about. They're not drinking from the river Styx, they're drinking from the river of life. So the way that I would finish this off is, I want you to ask yourself really intimately and truthfully, just right now, like at the end of this video, or if you're doing something right now, make a note of it for later. I want you to ask yourself, what is my inner voice really saying? And to take 10, 15, 20 minutes, even like half an hour, to just sit and not do anything else, not have your phone with you, not even have music on or anything, but just take the time to be in silence and ask yourself that question with like a genuineness, just like a genuineness of like, what is it that my inner voice is communicating to me right now? Because it doesn't have to be in line of what you're going to do with your life. That's just an example. The idea here is that that voice is always communicating something, and it might not have taken the shape of what you're going to do for a career yet. It might not have taken the shape of what your vision is going to be, or what it's going to look like in your relationships. These are all like brackets that we want to fit that into. But the first thing is just being able to listen to the voice. So surrender all those notions of what you feel like it should say, because that's often the programming that's coming from the outside, right? It's the sense that, okay, I'll listen to my inner voice, but only if it tells me what job to... It's like, no. Just start off with a sense of actually listening authentically to what that voice is saying. And just take 15 or 20 minutes, even if it's just an exercise you do once. Stand to gain a lot, stand to lose very little, right? Just to actually be able to listen to that. And it's funny because when you do this, you might notice that, like, I've often noticed that when I actually take 20 minutes to... We'll talk in the next video about connecting to feelings. That's the second pillar. I'm excited to make that one because it's something that's pretty close to all the kind of work that I do, really. But when I take the time to connect to what's going on within me and feel what I need to feel and connect to my inner voice, it's often something that comes up that, like, it can come up in a kind of a, not cryptic, but like a message that you didn't necessarily expect, and what it can say might surprise you. Like, I often notice that I actually just need to be a bit gentler with myself. And it's funny because usually, like, if you asked me consciously, are you compassionate with yourself? I'd say, yeah, I'm pretty compassionate with I understand myself. I don't beat myself. But it's like, automatically I'm like sort of instantiating it. But it's different, you just saying what it is and like thinking that's the case and going off externally and pushing out. This is a difference because we're redirecting that energy in. And actually just, I'll notice when I do that, there's this sense of like, sometimes you need to be able to trust the process more and actually just be kinder to yourself. It's like, that's what I sense. And when I allow myself to move into that space, it's like my whole experience becomes more enlivened. It's like the present starts to sing more. It's like you can hear what's going on around you and inside of you more clearly. And the third part of this intimacy, we'll talk about connecting to the present moment. That'll also be interesting. So stay tuned for those. But yeah, just taking the time to actually connect to what that inner voice is. And making that a small thing, like maybe you have a lunch break, or maybe you're just in a situation where you're stressed and you're looking on the outside trying to figure out what it is. You're trying to watch a YouTube video or listen to a podcast, and those things all have their place, obviously. But the idea here is like, what would happen if you spent more time just turning in and listening to what your own intuition and your own inner voice was saying? Because at the end of the day, that is what it comes back to. All the best personal development information, the best things that you're going to tune into, they're really only so good as they're going to teach you to better operate from the self, because you are ultimately experiencing the life through this form. So knowing how to navigate it and understanding that the blueprint is something that is inherent within the fiber of your being is always going to be richer than following the blueprint of someone else, even if they are convincing you that you can make a few bucks off of it, or get laid, or be part of this awesome community where everyone has like a ring, picturing like the stonecutters from The Simpsons. I have a snake ring. Well, I'm not in a cult. But yeah, that's going to be connecting to the inner voice. This has been a fun one to make. I hope you got value out of hearing this. If so, I appreciate you subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and commenting something. It helps the algorithm churn it down below. Share this to anyone you feel like would get value out of it. Share the message. I hope you're having a beautiful day, and I will see you very soon for the second and third pillars of building self-intimacy. And I have a kind of an inkling that this will expand into a larger series anyway. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you very soon.